Okay, what's the worst moment of your life? I mean, the worst so far, a moment of hopelessness, a moment of despair. Have you ever had something like that and then come through it and look back on it and wonder where was God and how was God at work in that moment? Why did it feel so bad if God was at work in that moment? Well, the book of Daniel, chapter 4, has something to say about that. This little thing we call rock bottom and how God works in those moments. And that's what we're talking about this week on the live show.
Kindred UMC live show features adults discussing adult topics, occasionally with adult language. It may not be suitable for young viewers. Please use discretion before watching.
Hello all! Welcome once again to the Kindred UMC pre-recorded live show, coming to you not live but pre-recorded from my front room, aka Kindred Studio A. My name is Chris Hayden. I am the pastor of Kindred UMC.
I'm Anne, and I am everything but clergy for Kindred UMC.
And I'm Danny, and I'm glad to be here. I'm running a little late, but I made it.
We're also glad you're here.
Yeah.
And that's a wonderful intro. Danny, glad to be here.
It was on the seat of my pants pretty much.
That's how we like to do it around here.
Yep.
We are continuing our march through the book of Daniel. We are on to chapter 4, and here's the thing about the book of Daniel. It is like each chapter is kind of its own little self-contained story. So last week, it was a children's story about Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. This week, it's literally like, it's a Shakespearean monologue given by the king of Babylon, King Nebuchadnezzar. So Babylon conquers Israel, conquers Jerusalem, exports a bunch of people from Jerusalem, a bunch of Israelites from Jerusalem to Babylon, and now those characters, our heroes, are serving in his court. But surprise, surprise, the writer of Daniel has chosen to now kind of place Nebuchadnezzar at the center of the narrative. He's the protagonist in this particular chapter. So it is a monologue. It reads as though he is giving a speech to the audience, you know? So, excuse me. I don't know what's going on. I don't even smoke. So I'm going to read a little bit and then I'm going to skip because it's a long monologue. This is how it begins. Daniel chapter 4, starting at verse 1. King Nebuchadnezzar, to all peoples, nations, and languages that live throughout the earth. So it's just kind of like, that's kind of like if you're reading a script, you know, that's not the part you say, that's the part that tells you who's supposed to say. So to all throughout the earth, may you have abundant prosperity. The signs and wonders that the Most High God has worked for me, I am pleased to recount. How great are his signs, how mighty are his wonders. His kingdom is an everlasting kingdom, and his sovereignty is from generation to generation. So already we've got a little bit of an interesting turn of events, which kind of goes along with last week we talked about chapter 3. King Nebuchadnezzar has a conversion experience. And now he's saying, like, praise be to God, and specifically Yahweh, the Israelite God. He's like, yay! And let me tell you why, you know? And he goes on to recount this story about a dream that he's had. And that's kind of a theme of Daniel, is about interpreting dreams. And this is how God speaks. This is the intelligence agency of the kingdom of Babylon. So he describes this dream about a tree that feeds everything and shades everything. It's this really big, abundant tree, and then it gets cut down. And he can't find anyone to interpret this dream for him. And Daniel, no. See, this is the problem when we do two of these. That's chapter 5.
Surprise!
That's chapter 5. Spoiler alert, next week we're going to talk about a dream about a tree. That's chapter 5. That's for the next one. No. King Nebuchadnezzar has a dream essentially, and a vision and a prophecy, essentially saying he is going to become like an animal and be driven out of his city and out into the fields. And it's going to be like, the phrase is, he will have the mind of an animal. And which is interesting because how did it start? Like, praise be to God. And yet he's going to have everything stripped away from him. Rather than reading the entire chapter, I encourage you to do so. And there will be a link down in the description below. But instead of reading the whole one, I'm going to talk about what happens when he hits rock bottom, becomes humble, and then kind of like turns it around. And he starts to go towards God. And this is verse 34. And he's describing this as a flashback. He says, "When that period was over, I, Nebuchadnezzar, lifted my eyes to heaven, and my reason returned to me." He's no longer got the mind of an animal. My reason returned to me. "I blessed the Most High and praised and honored the one who lives forever. For his sovereignty is an everlasting sovereignty, and his kingdom endures from generation to generation. All the inhabitants of the earth are accounted as nothing, and he does what he wills with the host of heaven and the inhabitants of the earth. There is no one who can stay his hand or say to him, 'What are you doing?' At that time, my reason returned to me, and my majesty and splendor were restored to me. For the glory of my kingdom, my counselors and my lords sought me out. I was reestablished over my kingdom, and still more greatness was added to me. Now I, Nebuchadnezzar, praise and extol and honor the King of heaven, for all his works are truth, and his ways are justice, and he is able to bring low those who walk in pride." So what we have here is the king of Babylon essentially praising God for a time when he was exiled, run out of his own power, run out of his own authority, and brought low and humbled. and it is what in recovery circles, AA and 12 steps and NA and it's what they call a rock bottom moment. And oddly enough, Nebuchadnezzar is actually grateful and praising God for his rock bottom moment. What do you make of that? What would bring someone to say thank you for a terrible turn of events?
I feel like it's usually after the turnaround. So like you hit the bottom and then
yes,
something
you're right.
happens.
That is exactly what happens.
And-
Yeah, you're right. It's after the turnaround.
Yeah.
He's not like in his lowest moment being like, "Oh, I'm so glad this sucks so hard."
Right.
No.
Because it's going to
Afterwards.
be so much better.
Yeah.
I think it's when you look back in the future, you look back and you're like, okay, this actually benefited me in a way and made me grow.
Mm-hmm.
But usually in that moment, it's very hard to see that. When
Oh
you
yeah,
think of it.
in the moment it sucks. It's
Yeah.
painful and it's hard and also I think there's a something that the church needs to address. I think a lot of churches teach when bad things happen, you be grateful. It's like, well, it's not that easy, guys. Like I don't think that's exactly helpful, But there's a kernel of that's what's so hard. There's a kernel of truth in there. When bad things happen, if we can zoom out and have a perspective on it, that does actually help. But also, like, that's not to say you can't feel bad about bad things happening. Right. Feeling bad about bad things happening is an integral part of faith and just being a person and being a human being. So I would like to ask you guys, have you ever had kind of a rock bottom moment where that ultimately proved to be a turnaround moment? And also, I want to caveat, especially if people are listening and they're considering their own stories, it is not helpful to compare suffering with someone else's suffering. I am a white, male, straight person who grew up in the United States. My rock bottom is not even going to remotely compare to, I don't know, an Asian woman who was sold into like sex trafficking or something. Yeah. Like my life is pretty fortunate, and we shouldn't compare that because my rock bottom is still my rock bottom.
Right.
It's still the worst thing I've ever experienced. And likewise with you guys and with anyone out there. Like your rock bottom is your rock bottom. Even if it's not as bad as somebody else's experience, it's still the worst thing you have ever experienced. And we shouldn't, be like, oh, I shouldn't feel that. I shouldn't feel that bad about that because other people have it worse. Like, no, feel how you feel. Like, let it be your rock bottom. It's the worst thing you've ever been through. Let it be the worst thing you've ever been through. You know. So, what comes to mind in those questions? I'm happy to go first too.
I can go first.
Okay, go for it.
For me, it was actually working during the peak of COVID. I worked in the hospital, and I was lucky enough to still have a job, but my hours were being cut. It was a very depressing time because I was going to work in not a happy environment. My parents have a lot of health issues, and I would be always afraid of bringing home what was there to my household. And then, like I said, my hours would be cut from work, and financially I struggled for a while. And I was 24. So to me, I was like, I have all these aspirations. I want to do this, and this. And it kind of cut me in my tracks for a while.
This was not what was promised.
Yeah, I think I had a moment.
I was told that if I got into this field, there was going to be, all of these expectations, and now there's a pandemic.
Well, I felt like the whole world had changed, and I was a little angry for a while, being selfish. Well, I want to do this, I want to do that. And, I learned from it, and, a lot of it was...
What do you mean selfish? I don't think... I want to challenge that a little bit, but tell me what you mean.
Well, because I think people around the world have it much worse. So
that's the thing. Like, again, we're in that. We a lot of us have this tendency to compare our suffering. There's obviously benefit in, like, hey man, it could be worse. Like, there's some benefit in this is not a head wound. This is not catastrophic. This is not ending like everything that I understand. But I think there's a lot of what I'm doing is trying to give people permission to grieve. Mm-hmm. It's okay that you felt bad about it not going the way you thought it was going to go.
Right.
Like, there's nothing wrong with that. Like, that happens to us, and it's okay to feel bad about it. It's not okay to get blamey and judgmental towards other people and jealous and envy. Like, those are all kind of damaging things. Mm-hmm. But actually being like, yeah, I really thought my work at the hospital was going to pan out a certain way, and that's what I was told, and it really didn't go that way at all. I certainly had some of that with this church. Like, we were selling a big plot of land in a building, and COVID hit right when we were closing that deal, and we had to negotiate down the price a lot just to get the buyer to stay with us, and it was like, well, I mean, it's still good because we're selling the building and we're moving in a good, positive direction. But man, it's not what we thought it was going to be, and we had to readjust all of our plans and expectations, and like that was painful. Mm-hmm. It was not fun. Sorry, I didn't mean to tell you how to feel.
No, it was okay.
I feel like I told you how to feel. You shouldn't feel that way. I'm trying to tell everybody that they can feel however they want, so stop feeling that way.
Yeah, I think for a while it was like, my suffering is not equal to what other, because somebody will always have it worse.
And that is true. Like, that's a reality.
But there was a period where I was like, this sucks.
Yeah.
And like it did for many people during the pandemic, and but still I felt like in my mid-20s it was just a rough time, and the things I was seeing and being around. And
you're never mid-20s ever again.
Yeah.
You're only mid-20s for that small window, mid-20s.
But now I look back at it and I'm still here and I'm healthy, and so that is a positive way to look back at that time that was not great at the moment, but I'm able to look back on it, whereas a lot of people that were unable to move past that period of time. Yeah. So
how about you, Anne? Do you have something comes to mind for you?
I do.
Do you feel comfortable sharing it with the class?
Of course. We won't go into major details because that would take 20 minutes just to go into by itself. But trivia, I have a disorder that is...
You know what? I knew it.
Yes. I mean, it's not like life-threatening or anything, and, we won't go into it totally. It's urogenital and reproductive related, so like pelvic floor. We don't need to totally go into all of the details.
Oh, you're getting into Dr. Drew stuff.
Yeah.
Dr. Drew, After Dark, has taught me a lot about the pelvic floor.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. So, yeah, we could have a whole conversation about that, but not right now. But I was diagnosed when I was 21. I had just passed my state license to be a veterinary technician. I was working in a clinic. I was in college trying to be a doctor. I was doing, life was good. And then smack. I had to, my job and I weren't a good fit anyway, so we were parting ways. So it was already like a crummy situation that just got worse because then I was unemployed and I had to go seek medical treatment because I went to college in UWF, and that's in Pensacola. If you've never heard of it, there's a reason. It's like a hole in the wall. There's nothing there. So I go to the doctor to get help. There's no specialist to treat me there. I had to drive back home and go move back in with mom and dad, which, oh, by the way, when you leave mom and dad's house, they said, don't come looking for your room. One of your siblings is going to get it. So I'm sleeping on the couch. I could not pay my rent. I actually had to like take my tax return to pay my rent for those 2 or 3 months that I had to go back home and get treated and have all these things happen. I had to go see a surgeon. I had like, there was a whole slew of things that happened in that like 3-month period that was just insane. But it changed so much for me because it was like a lifestyle change for what I needed for that issue to be fixed. But it also taught me a lot about like who you can rely on kind of thing, like who was really in your corner. Yeah. And you know, it was a life learning experience.
Well, thanks, Jonah. Jonah just bumped the camera. All right. Jonah's the dog. I kind of had, I don't think it was that drastic. Thankfully, I've never had a serious medical issue. But I remember when I was I was a worship director, and I was kind of working on becoming a pastor. And my doctor put me on a steroid for allergies, like a nose spray. And I was like, he's like, nah, it's not a problem. It's not going to affect your personality, whatever. I was like, are you sure? You said steroid. I've heard things about steroids. And it did. It severely affected my personality. It made me very aggressive. And that's right so I was a staff person at a church. We got a new pastor right then and there. So I'm making first impressions with this guy and pretty aggressively making first impressions. That's also right when I was interviewing with the big grand poobah board of ordained ministry that decides whether or not you get to be a pastor. And that interview, let's just say, did not go well. Because like the whole point of that interview is to kind of ask challenging questions and find your blind spots. And I was just aggressive and defensive. And like, and long story short, they did not say yes. And eventually, me and that pastor butt heads so much that he didn't fire me, but he effectively fired me. He couldn't fire me because I was too well liked in the church, but he made it a pain in my rear so much that I left and I took it. But here's the thing: the job that I took 2 jobs. I did a part-time worship for another church. But the job that I took was my CPE residency, and I was a chaplain at Tampa General Hospital, and that was perhaps one of the most important formative experiences. It was one of the most important formative personality calling shaping experiences of my life. That experience did more for my calling and my ministry than anything else. And now I find like Nebuchadnezzar, I find myself looking back in the moment. It just totally sucked poop. Like it was horrible. I hated it. I was mad. I was sad. I was grieving, and I was raging, and like all of that stuff was going on in me. And now I look back on it, I'm going like, now I can see how God was involved. Like God did not want me in that situation with that person. Now, and not to say that that's a bad person. Like he was a fine pastor, but that's not where God wanted me. And not to say that God gave me a bad steroid that made me mean so that he could get me, but like, God has this way of working in the midst of our circumstances. And I think one of the best, most important keys to life, at least for me, has been learning to, in those circumstances, not Not say I should feel good, not bad, because this is God at work. That's not helpful. But to say I feel terrible and I'm angry and I'm still going to stay connected to God and I'm still going to be on the lookout for God at work in the midst of this terrible situation. And that was one of those things that absolutely changed my life forever for the better. Not just my life, but I mean, talk to anybody who's been through our disciple groups. Our disciple groups are based off of my experience in CPE. And so it not only helped me, but it's currently actively helping other people. So if you want to be in a disciple group, email Chris at kindredumc.com, and you should definitely consider doing that. And we're also out of time. So may the Lord bless you and keep you. May the Lord make his face to shine upon you and be gracious unto you. May the Lord lift up his countenance upon you and give you peace. Amen. I sure hope I got that Nebuchadnezzar dream thing right. I'm second guessing it right now.